Well, really great to see you. Thanks for coming. I'm Hesse McGraw, and it's been my pleasure and honor to curate this exhibition on behalf of the Cat Spring Collection. And what is the Cat Spring Collection? Cat Spring is really a family collection that began by Bob Ackerley's chance meeting with Ron Hoover in Houston's oldest bar in the early 1980s. And that meeting launched really a pretty profound journey by Bob and his wife Nora, and then later by their son, Ben Ackerley, who's not here with us today. But what you're seeing in this room is our works drawn from their collective collection. My father told me nothing good ever happens in a bar, and clearly that's not the case in this moment. I think what differentiates this collection is a deep commitment to Houston and Texas artists. Some of you are in the room today, so I want to call out the artists here who are in the exhibition. Tudor Mitroy. Yeah. Howard Sherman. Yeah. Aaron Parazette. And of course, Daniel Rios Rodriguez. Did I get everyone? I think I got everyone. Well, it's really my pleasure to introduce the panel today, and we'll begin shortly. It's really meant to be a lively discussion around collecting in the Houston and Texas arts ecosystem. And towards the end, we'll take some questions, but really want to hear your thoughts as well. So I'll start by introducing Bob Ackerley. Bob's a Houston transplant, moved here in the early 80s and has been a businessman in Houston since that time. As I mentioned, met Ron Hoover by chance in La Carafe in the 80s, and then that began this extraordinary collecting journey. Our focus on Houston and Texas artists has been the driving passion and has led not just to collecting work, but supporting publications. Some of the books you see on the table, the very recent book by Aaron Parazette and the book by Marcelyn McNeil were supported by the Cat Spring Collection. This exhibition is a pop-up. Bob wanted to share some of the collection with Houston and with Untitled visitors. Alison de Lima Greene has been in Houston around since the same time that Bob joined this community. Over that time, has brought 1,200 works into the MFA collection. That work is continuing. In the next year, she's very focused on collection work, as well as some external partnerships, and is working with Jennifer at MD Anderson to bring MFA's collection beyond their walls to MD Anderson's care facility. So exciting news to come on that. I want to introduce David Cohen, who's here from New York. David, welcome back to Houston. David started a kind of legendary monthly convening in New York called the Critics Roundtable at the Brooklyn Public Library, where critics would actually duel it out. So they would convene around a specific exhibition or a specific topic and have very lively debate. David was the founder of Art Critical, an online magazine and forum for discourse. We're really thrilled to have you here, David. Thanks for joining us. And Daniel Rios Rodriguez, whose work is here, is an artist from San Antonio who recently moved to Dallas, where he's teaching at SMU. And Daniel's a Yale MFA grad, shows with Nicole Bushin in New York and Seven Sisters here in Houston, where this work came from. Daniel's an artist who I think packs incredibly potent content into sometimes very tight packages and sometimes more expansive, and really grateful to have you here.
Thank you.
Joining us from Dallas. I'll mention one more thing before I turn it over to Bob. So this exhibition is in some ways a precursor to the opening of Hotel Daphne, which is owned by Bob and his son, Ben, developed in partnership with Bunkhouse Hotels. Some of you know St. Augustine, which is also a bunkhouse project. Their hotel will be filled with art, so 160 works, filling that collection, many of the same artists. I don't think any of this work, but that opens first November 15th, the restaurant, and then January 5th, you can begin staying there and in a way living with the collection. So,
great. Well, Hesse, thanks for the introduction, and thanks for all your work to organize these events this week and put this together. But let's dive into it here. I'm going to throw questions out, and let's just see where they go. We have more questions than time. I guess that's kind of the way it is in life. But David, let's get started with you. What is the primary responsibility of the art critic today? Is it to guide public taste, to offer historical context, or to challenge the artist's intention?
That's a good menu. I'm tempted, as I am at the hotel where you are kind enough to put me up, to say yes, please, to everything on the menu. You're asking me this question just as I've officially retired as an art critic, so it's probably a good moment to look back, and it's also safe to make demands of critics, because I won't have to live up to them myself. I've sort of taken my cue from you and see that it's a lot more fun to buy art than it is to write about it. So I'm leaving it to younger, braver souls to do the writing, and enjoying my retirement. And as I was at the fair just the other day, I was surprised. I had no idea to expect it, that an old friend whose work I've curated into an exhibition at the Studio School, I think about 15 years and counting. Yes, a good 15 years ago, Susanna Coffey has a stunning show of night paintings, and they were within my budget, and I bought one thinking, well, that's fine, they'll send me an invoice in a couple of weeks and they'll arrange shipping and everything. She said, great, she said, and she whipped it off the wall and said, can you pay by credit card? I said, well, but isn't this painting going to be on show for the rest of... No, we've got plenty more, she said. And she had a little safe, a little metal box sitting against the wall, and she opened it up and pulled out another one to put on the wall in its place. I thought, that's the way to do it. That's the Simon said to the pieman way of approaching curating. It's the idea of agonizing for ages over what goes where and what belongs here and what doesn't belong here. And that kind of down and dirty approach to putting some pictures on the wall, making them look as good as they can. And I think these pictures in this room look pretty good to me. I mean, it's not an art hang. It's not, if you gave a professional curator this job, they'd pick the 3 best-known artists and put the rest in storage, wouldn't they? And they'd look very neat and very slick with a wall each and expert lighting and probably some wall text that takes an hour to read next to it to give a political and critical, theoretically critical introduction to what you're supposed to think before you start looking at the work. Whereas I have to say, for me, it's much more entertaining and stimulating and rewarding to see through the fulcrum of 2, or I think 3, because I think Hesse himself has had some input, hasn't he, on the formation, a collective collection, as Hesse was describing it. It brings out, well, anything that's collected with intent but without program is going to produce, I think, the kind of plethora of possibilities that this very rich little collection does produce. And I think it gives a lot to think about and talk about, ruminate over, and wonder about, to see quite startling juxtapositions of very different ways of putting together images and very different notions of what can be done within the four corners of a canvas. And I noticed that even Erin's piece in the back, although highly irregular in shape, does have four corners, albeit a couple of them are rather closely pinched together. It does seem to have, like Shakespeare's All the World's a Stage, endless possibilities. I find that's what I want when I see collections. If I see a collection where I know every artist in the collection, I'm bored already. I need to discover somebody new when I see somebody's collection. I need to see a juxtaposition I wouldn't expect, but that makes total sense when you see it, like Howard Sherman next to David Salle. I mean, there is a regional artist with a New York connection in Sherman, and there's a global artist who started somewhere, I believe in Oklahoma of all places, wasn't it? And studied in California and made his career in New York, but is known around the world. That's just a difference of current. That's a current reading which could well change. They could flip, or in 100 years' time, one doesn't know who's going to be the more global reputation or who's not. It doesn't really have to do with where things stand at the moment. It has to do with how images resonate when they resonate. But at the moment, seeing those two images back to back on the wall, there are differences in temperature, differences in degrees of calculation, and yet there are interesting, very suggestive commonalities, and one can almost see branches going from one to the other in terms of if you want to misread the image as a unified image, which is always somehow, it's just what the brain is going to do with it once you fall asleep afterwards at night and the images recur anyway. So you may as well start that dream process early in the gallery itself. That hardly does answer your questions, does it? But they're good questions, and they can. I'll see what the other panelists make of them.
So, did you want something else in mind?
Well, Alison, I think let's take a little different here. As a I think of a curator kind of as a bridge between the artist and the public. And my question for you is, with the extensive resources in the collection at the MFA, you have so many possibilities. So perhaps you can share some insight into what exhibitions actually get realized and what's kind of the driver for you in thinking about what you present to the public.
Well, I think to sort of back up a little bit, I will start with saying I grew up in the art world. I have no imagination. I'm in my father's profession. He was a painter. And so what I think is incredibly important to having our toolbox when you're working in the arts is talk to the artists, talk to collectors, talk to dealers, talk to everyone. There's an enormous ocean of information out there. Usually when you're trained in graduate school, in particular, there's that kind of narrowing down and academicism that David was just talking about, and that is a good discipline to have under your belt, but it's not enough. And I remember one of my teachers saying that we spent a lot of time deciding who were the best 10 artists. And I'm like, that is ridiculous to me. That makes no sense whatsoever. That kind of ranking very quickly becomes exclusionary. And what I like is recognizing now, both in the exhibition program we have and our collection program, is that if treated properly, art history is an elastic discipline. There's one canon proposed that was very strongly influential by a generation of critics and art historians that was most prominently manifested at the Museum of Modern Art. That was the sort of idea of a progressive art history, the so-called Alfred Barr torpedo that went from Cezanne through Picasso through abstract expressionism. We now know that was a useful tool, but we also know that actually Alfred Barr didn't believe that. He drew it up as a fundraiser. And so people often misunderstand that that was how narrowly he thought. You look carefully at what Alfred Barr brought into the Museum of Modern Art collection, embracing folk art, embracing lesser-known Eastern European artists, hiring curators to bring Latin American art into the collection. So I think that kind of plurality is already embedded in the discipline. And at the museum, I also want you to walk into a gallery and see some works that you want to see, that you know. I just finished a major installation that is thrilling to me because it brings out a fantastic Rachel Whiteread that has not been seen at the museum since 2008. It's so large, it's a challenge to hang. I've also installed new acquisitions, including an Ai Weiwei and a large Sam Gilliam. But also important was bringing out the work of a former Carr Fellow, DeWitt Godfrey, who has a solid reputation now in northeastern area of New York, some public work out there, but is not a superstar, and yet this is a superstar work. I'm going to back up a little bit. Superstar is a term I hate. It again suggests a kind of hierarchy that museums do participate in, but it's not the exclusive realm. And no museum can survive without the support of its collectors. And when you see the number of works that have come into the collection, a small portion of those have been acquired with funds that I've helped raise or were endowed by generous donors. But our collection would be nowhere what it is if other collections hadn't come in. Some collectors who are no longer active in Texas art, Nona Barrett passed away more than a decade ago. Richard Barrett has shifted his focus, but up in Dallas, they did amazing work charting a Texas collection, and we benefited from them. We had a Vernon Fisher on view for the last 2 years that they donated to the museum. We have another Vernon Fisher up right now. So there's always these sort of ricocheting connections that come local, come national, and then of course we do recognize people come to the museum to see international artists. We are very privileged to be able to bring in artists like Ai Weiwei or El Anatsui or Anish Kapoor. I'm never going to apologize for bringing in the well-known artists as well. I think that most artists want to be in dialogue with each other. With that.
I think that's right, yeah. Absolutely.
Great. So Daniel, let me kind of ask you, like, to take it from the artist's viewpoint and just to kind of give some insight about yourself and your own work. Painting is a process, right? And there is a beginning, a middle, and an end. So kind of maybe take us through that for your own work and how you think about that process. And I think, one of the things that's fascinating to me, do you get stuck? And if you're stuck, how do you get out of being stuck in that process?
I think that the beginning, I don't really think of my work in terms of having a beginning and a middle and the end in the way that I don't think of my life as having a beginning and a middle and an end. It's just something that keeps on going. And I think when I'm working on a painting, some paintings, very rarely they'll happen kind of with the quickness, and other paintings will just drag on and on and on and on. And I think for me that speaks to just wanting to be constantly engaged. And going back to what Alison was saying about, I think a curator's job is to kind of be in contact, be in conversation with many, many different kinds of people from different areas of the art world. I think at least for painters, it's the responsibility of the painter to just be in dialogue with painting and painters And maybe at some point, once you spend a lot of time with painting, then you start to talk to other people. But the real obligation is to just spend a lot of time looking in museums and then certainly just making. So I don't know if that addresses what you're talking about, but yeah, for me, I don't think of it in a linear way. I'm not thinking about, nothing is ever pre-planned. So this painting, it's just the panel, and then everything else is just something that I find, and then things that I feel in relation to what I'm finding and what I'm thinking and what's happening, and it's just slowly built. And before you know it, it just has its own life, and it's just kind of born and done, and then you move on to the next thing. Yeah.
Great, fascinating. So I guess a question for the whole panel now. This is just art collecting has a very long history, right? It goes back to the pharaohs. I mean, they collected art. The Romans, Augustus and Hadrian were art collectors, and so this has been going on for thousands of years. And I guess my question to you, I'm an art collector, but I'd kind of like to ask you, what is it that drives humans to collect art?
Well, for those of us who don't make art, collecting art is a form of collage in which we do make art. The canvases are walls, or our vaults, I guess, if we're a museum. But it's when you put, you have a work that you see and that you want, that you need, that answers some call within to some notion of meaning or beauty or some talisman of something bigger than yourself, and that you want to anchor the place where you sleep and dream and make love and eat, and make that something more than just a quotidian place. But if it without sounding pompous about it, it makes it, even if it's just a pleasing decoration, by putting something that transcends the quotidian activities that go on in your own place, you're making something in a funny way sacred out of your own little temple. But then as soon as you put a second piece with it, then there is a new conversation happening that's in a way beyond you and what you maybe had in mind or expected and your own world, because you've got two pieces that are coming from perhaps the same or more likely two different intelligences that find themselves creating something symbiotic in a conversation that's bigger than whatever thoughts or decisions or exclusions or preoccupations went into creating the specific work in the artist's studio. The work has now gone beyond the studio. It's in juxtaposition, in conversation with another piece that's hopefully as well considered. And then there's the third element, the third pole, which is the place where they find themselves. So collecting is really making meaning out of where you are.
I would say that also there's no one reason for collecting. Some of you may have seen last summer we had a large exhibition of the Pavia tapestries that were commissioned by the French royal court in the 16th century to celebrate a decisive battle. So it was partly a history lesson. They also helped make rooms in a very cold climate warmer. A tapestry creates, an interior space that's more welcoming. The pharaohs collected for immortality. And I think a great number of collectors, whether self-consciously doing it or not, are creating self-portraits. And that I see that even in this room. I think I would argue slightly with David. I think this has been very subtly and thoughtfully curated. There's incredible resonances. I want to ask Bob at some point, what is it about pink that captures your attention? But I think it's creating a better living environment around you, but it's also a way, again, for those of us who don't make art, to announce what we care about. And the other thing is, almost every really exciting discovery I've made about an artist I didn't know about either came from a dealer, and dealers take more risks than anyone ever wants to give them credit for, or another artist. For example, I'm looking over your shoulder at Robyn O'Neill, and I remember when Michael Miller, her teacher at a small college in East Texas, called me up and said, I've got a student you need to know about.
Yeah, I think of my daughter's rock collection. You know, she's 18 now, but I think about, you know, when we would go on walks and she would just pick things up. And at some point she no longer wanted it, and I kept it, and it's at my studio, and it's a box of rocks that she collected probably over 10 years. And I think that in some ways, maybe like collecting art is, it's owning a piece of the world in the moment in which you're witnessing the world. And I think, you know, whether it's a rock collection or paintings, whether they're free or you're paying for them, it's kind of ownership and a declaration of where you're at and what you see and what you value. And I think, we probably all have those kinds of collections at homes, where whether you're traveling someplace and you just pick up a tchotchke or you pick up a pine cone from a hike that you went on. Those are all things that are just kind of sitting and living with you, that are just a documentation of a lived experience, you know?
Question about painting. You know, as we know today, roughly a 600-year history of painting. And I guess, you know, every artist that takes up the brush, right, is engaging with the history of painting. You know, how is it possible that this art form continues to enthrall both makers and viewers, you know, 600 years later? What is it about painting that just continues to be? I mean, we've heard about the death of painting, and here we are, you know, and just it apparently didn't die.
It's like that Monty Python routine, I'm not dead yet. Maybe you should start that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I'll reference another one of my children. So my son, you know, he's 16, and you know, in the last 3 years, as he's gotten older, he's gotten bigger, and he's seen more of the world. There are moments where he sees things, and he'll see somebody doing something, accomplishing some kind of task, and he'll say, well, I can do that, but he didn't actually do it. But he says, and he believes in himself that he can do it. And I think that there's something in painting that people recognize, that I can do that. Like, I see how that is made. I think I know how that's made. I think I understand the structure. I understand the imagery. I'm going to try it. And I think that's what brings people to the table of painting, is that a desire to do something similar using their own voice. And then at some point people say, oh, to hell with it, I can't, it's too hard. And then you get the few that stick around and actually really do it well. But I think it starts, at least for me, it starts there with the belief that one could, and then you set yourself to the task, and then there's that realization that, you know, perhaps not, and then you do something else, right? Whether it's in the arts or not, but you know, I always thought of a painting as the gateway drug to the arts, so, yeah.
I think it's easel painting that's about 600 years old. Painting is about 40 or 50,000 years old. If we go back to Lascaux, is that what, 20,000 BC or something like that? Yes. So a little earlier?
There's paintings before.
There are paintings before, but Lascaux is like the Sistine Chapel of the prehistoric, and of course there was painting before the Sistine Chapel. But we need these pinnacles, these landmarks. There's a great exhibition that was put on 40,000 years of modern art, which started with Lascaux and went on to Picasso and the contemporary art, and missed out most of what was in between, with a few sort of nice Neolithic stones here and there. But no, that's not to minimize that easel painting, I think, is a very discrete and distinct history and tradition. And even though we have this large, marvelous work, Jammie, who was that? Jammie Holmes. It's a revelation to me. I wasn't familiar with his work before, but I gather that he has and expanding and a significant reputation already. It's a very contained, beautiful, lush work that just in its juxtaposition, sorry to use that word over and over again, I have a cousin who, whenever she hears the word, starts making facial grimaces and laughing about artists and art critics. But that, nonetheless, that collision, that dialogue between, I guess, a fetish and the living form, which the living form itself is a fetish with a highly sexual connotation in the flower. Well, it's beyond a connotation. A flower is sex. Which makes me wonder about this asking your drug dealer. But ask your drug dealer if your heart is strong enough to look at a flower and think about what a flower is and smell a flower and perhaps get stung in the process. Because that's, I think, the biggest picture in the room, yes. But it's the biggest picture in the room, and yet one can envision an individual with a table with paints on it, and a lighting set up, and some expectation of how the thing is going to get out of the room when he's finished working on it. That effectively it is an extension of the easel tradition. It's an image, a self-contained experience that's going to be sent out into the world to fare for itself and find an end user, or start a journey of end users. Because as a former chairman of Sotheby's, Earl Gowrie once said, a collector is not the final user of a work, but the temporary custodian of it. When they're done with it, it's going to, I imagine in his mind, hopefully come back to Sotheby's. But be that as it may, it's going to nonetheless change hands. And it's like the yellow Rolls Royce, if anyone remembers that wonderful movie. The yellow Rolls Royce may be the epitome of elegance for driving your wife and having been caught with your mistress on a day at Ascot. But it can end up in the hands of a mafioso or during one of the many Yugoslav civil wars. So that's the same yellow Rolls Royce that sees those three different fates. I think easel painting is, and it's very important to stress this in the times we're living in, where with everything else that's under assault, what most perplexingly is under assault is the global system of the free exchange of ideas, goods, and information. And that easel painting was very well ahead of the curve in the history of first capitalism, but then also other political systems and that are based on some degrees of equality and cooperation and common sense and lack of boundaries. That painting is an information system that, however much, yes, you need, and ironically, the more reductive and pure and the abstraction is, the more people who are not in the art world feel alienated and, oh, this is above my head, they say, when they're looking at something which is, in fact, as directly in their view as anybody else's, which is one of the supreme ironies of art. But nonetheless, it's a system of communication, signs, symbols. It's a communication means that transcends language and in its portability transcends borders and can have multiple owners and be invested in every sense of the word invested, for such different reasons. It doesn't seem to me at all surprising that easel painting thrives and continues, because it's, as it were, a pioneer of exactly what the world and humanity needs, which is the free and untrammeled and unmolested exchange of goods, ideas, information, and means of survival.
I think also in our increasingly digital age, easel painting plays an interesting role. It's more easily reproduced than other objects in the field. One of my teachers, H.W. Jansen, as a matter of fact, who had made sculpture his study, as well as writing a now very outdated art history survey, said that you don't have good documentation of sculpture with anything less than 16 images. And, photography probably is the fleetest of materials to travel down the information highway and the digital highway. But painting has this wonderfully ambiguous role in the digital world now, because on one hand, you can reproduce somewhat faithfully what everything in this room looks like. Yours is the most challenging because of the tactility of the work.
And you get a prize for that.
Well done, sir. But not to sound condescending, but I think there's nothing like the reward of seeing the actual object. And I'm hoping that museums stay alive, as well as churches, as well as private collections, as well as hospitals. Any venue, including the commercial gallery, that allows people access to seeing the thing itself. I don't know how many of you tried to leave downtown after visiting the convention center this week, and I'd forgotten that one of the parallel streets to the east of the convention center was under construction. And I had to do a little loop to get out because they're expanding the highway. And not only was I frustrated that I was seeing some buildings I love about to be torn down, and a really vital aspect of East Downtown about to be erased for more asphalt, but also there were some great murals there, also slated for destruction. And so I think the ability to bring painting out of the gallery into every kind of arena, whether it's your cell phone and a compromised view, or driving down a street and seeing a mural, or visiting some form of arts institution, there's still, at least for people who have not been conditioned to not look at art, I think all young people are accepting. And very young people never question the difference between is it abstract or is it figurative. They're taught to think that certain painting is more important or not, or that abstract is difficult, which it's not. I know that when I look at a painting, the first thing I don't do is categorize, is it abstract or not, but that's my privileged position. But there is an electric charge still of confronting the material and its scale, even its smell. We all know that we've been near paintings that have just been finished. And you can tell it's just been finished.
You can be with a Leon Kossoff that's been in the collection of the museum in Australia, one of the Australian museums for 25 or 30 years, and you can still smell the paint. So.
And I like looking at our Forrest Bess, and you can see his fingers that drag the paint across the canvas.
And sorry, not to hold up Daniel, but I was in the MFA yesterday. I'm afraid I've forgotten the name of the artist, but just in that sequence of videos just before the Marilyn Minter, there's this extraordinary montage of about 5,000 images of Rodin sculptures from over 50 publications, and it flickers in such a way that the two-dimensional becomes three-dimensional. So maybe with I've been having trouble with my iPhone recently. I threw it on the floor by mistake. Sort of. And I think maybe actually There may be hope for us even on iPhones looking at Instagram that somehow by accident we'll find ways to animate and make more vivid these compromised images.
And a shout out to the artist, that's Mungo Thompson, who made the work.
Thank you very much.
And my colleague, Lisa Volpe, not myself, who put together that great installation.
All right.
Let me shift gears here a minute, and I'm going to kind of go to Daniel, but one or two more questions and we'll kind of go to the audience. But art has often been a means of informing and activating social movements, right? When our society faced divisive moments. And whether it was back to abolition, women's rights, civil rights, the anti-war movement in the 60s, art was a way to make a statement and express a viewpoint. Given where we are today, is there a moment for artists to be more assertive in expressing viewpoints that kind of counter the dominant narrative today?
I think that's tricky. I think every moment is a moment in which an artist, there's an opportunity to respond to something. I don't think there's necessarily, it doesn't have to be a boiling point. There doesn't have to be a moment of crisis where you can respond to the horror of what's happening politically, whether it's local or internationally. You can find anything at any moment and find enough reasons to be pissed off and make a painting about it. I think it's really just dependent upon the artist's genuine desire to communicate that anger, that frustration, that unhappiness. And I think that not everyone is suited to that. Not everyone's practice can accommodate that anger or frustration. And so I don't think that every artist, while we might have the responsibility to communicate these things, that can be done in other ways, but we don't necessarily have to make paintings about it all the time. I don't think everybody has to do that. I've got 2 paintings in a faculty show at SMU, and those were made 2 summers ago, I think, and they were in direct response to what's happening to the Palestinian people. And those, I refer to those paintings as in-between paintings, which are paintings that I made in between 2 larger bodies of work. The larger bodies of work are usually the things that I'm thinking about that are in reference to my life and what I'm interested in. These in-between paintings are kind of where I was supposed to take time off and just kind of clean up the studio, but I'm witnessing all these things, and because I'm witnessing it and I'm kind of boiling over, I thought, fuck it, I'm gonna make these paintings, and these paintings are gonna address my frustration. But that was just those are like 2 small chunks, It doesn't necessarily represent the totality of what I do or necessarily what I'm interested in as a full practice. And I think some artists are very good at kind of holding on to and always having a grip on politics and ideas and can always make work about it. I'm not one of those artists, right? I have those in-between paintings, and for me, that's well enough. But yeah.
I think Mark Flood is a good person to think about right now in that context. And I think this, you could talk about that work, about how he uses text, what message is he getting across, what is he distracting you from. But I think also, you don't ask the painting to do the work of political action. It does not. Political action, if you really want to change the community, a painting won't do it. And if you wanted to, you're gonna die with frustration. Political action happens at the grassroots level. It can happen, going door to door, raising funds for causes you care about, et cetera. I think there are 2 different disciplines. I think what is interesting to me is after COVID, and thinking about how traumatic that was, and I'm not gonna go into the politics of today right now because it's too enormous, but just thinking about the deep isolation a lot of us went into, and reflecting the kind of isolation an artist usually has to experience to get work done in the studio or at a typewriter or whatever their chosen medium is. People across the globe went into isolation. And the work that came out afterwards that I saw in studios and in galleries, and some works that have entered into the collection, very few of them look like they are about COVID. And similarly, if you go back a century to the period of the great pandemic of 1918, 1919, you don't see artwork about that pandemic either. But the tenor of art changed during those years, and other subject matters came forward. And so I think when you look at art as a barometer of the emotional and social climate, a lot of times it will be subtle and it won't be a direct message.
Yeah. Very interesting point, yes. There should be a show, 20s show, that looks at 19 and 2020s through the prism of quiet recoveries. Unfortunately, first time round, precursing much worse to come. So what our own painting is telling us now is perhaps something we do need to read, because although I don't think painting is a vehicle for direct action, I think we're agreed on that. The best you end up with is an artist-designed T-shirt or maybe a banner to be unfurled in a demonstration, although even there, the better the art, the worse the banner. What I do think is that art collectively does form a kind of tea leaf collection that one can delve into in order to try to, with a mixture of metaphors, get one's fingers into the entrails and try and work out what is happening. But maybe even there, I don't think so, because art and painting is so multifaceted and at its best so rooted in dialogues with the past that I don't think it's the best way of reading the present moment. I think newspapers and pop songs and esoteric tastes in something like furniture probably say something more meaningful about how the society is faring collectively than painting. I think the painting is quite rightly on a pedestal. It belongs at a different level. So I don't find it surprising that visual artists and artists in general, actors, musicians, scientists, are people who are at the cutting edge of political thinking and who are most concerned and most informed. That just goes with the culture of being cultured. But I don't think that one looks to any of those mediums specifically for political leadership. I think good, decent political leadership is an art in itself, and it's an art that's clearly been woefully neglected. But perhaps we need to create academies for leadership, and maybe have artists teach in those academies.
Yeah.
Well, great. Well, a couple more questions, but perhaps why don't we open up to the audience? I mean, is there any questions from the audience now? People.
Well, I'm wrestling with seeing this question through a profoundly different lens, which I'll share. I think what you said at the end, we should open academies for leadership and artists should be teaching in those academies is a brilliant idea. So we sort of concisely called this exhibition On View, which doesn't mean anything other than you can come and see it. There was an alternate title, which is Ask an Artist If Society is Healthy Enough to Survive. And it's, of course, a riff on Mark Flood's question, which on its face might seem absurd, however, with some distance, feels pretty prescient. David, I think what you said about the question of survival is right. I mean, what's at stake is survival of the self, as in case of Robyn O'Neill's work, or society in the case of your work. Roger Shimomura's painting is about a personal experience of having been interned as a toddler. And yet he didn't produce that work until many years later, when he could read his grandmother's diaries of being a Japanese internment camp. So although art may not be the vehicle for direct political action, it might be the most effective tool to ensure society's survival. And that's exposition, but I want to throw it back at you and try to get a response.
I mean, I think that it exists is a testament to kind of maybe not necessarily the total health of a society, but that we are not in a position. Well, I don't think that. I mean, I don't know for sure, but going back to and referencing the Palestinian people, I don't think that painters are probably making paintings right now. The painters of Gaza. I don't think that they're in their studios with mixing up oil paint and reflecting on the day. They're concerned with other things, and that we can do that as artists speaks to a kind of health. There's certainly dysfunction, but we're not at that state yet. I hope we don't get there, but yeah.
A couple of things. One, I also don't think the hostages, if there are any hostages, are having that opportunity either. And that subject keeps coming up. But I actually I'd like to thank everyone for participating. I think it's great. If y'all, I want to hear from everyone. If y'all were to glance around the room in a few sentences, what would be like an aesthetic through line that you'd articulate? I mean, Alison, you'd mentioned you deserved a lot of paint,
Gee, I think the thing that catches me about this collection is a really old-fashioned word, humanism, and that it's a term that I like to apply to art that transcends whether something's abstract or figurative or narrative or not. But I do think that there is a heartfelt engagement that runs through a lot of the work. And I'm not saying that there's other kinds of art that are less meaningful, but I think there is the mark of the hand, the choices made by artists, the atmosphere, if you will, of the art around us that is a little nebulous to put your finger on. But I think as a sum total, whether you're looking at Ron Hoover's rather terrifying Man in a Suit, which reminds me of my favorite Ron Hoover story, which was, you may know this one, Bob. Ron grew up in East Texas, knew where the Klan was, decided one day to give them hell, got in his truck, drove out to some trailer near Jasper, Texas, to give them hell. And unfortunately, his truck didn't start again afterwards. So there was a fundraiser to help Ron get through his medical bills afterwards. And so that was someone trying to take direct action versus painting it. But the painting still speaks to that anger of that moment. But in not that is a Klansman necessarily, but truth to power in that work. Others are about humor. Others are about, I love being in front of Aaron Parazette right now, which makes me think of a phrase that another artist friend gave me, which was, art with words in it is just lines with verbal skills. And so I think there are verbal skills in everything in this room, actually. So I don't know if that helps you, Howard.
Or there's the nutrients that we need to find the words as we look at them. Maybe that's another way of saying it, but breaking it down chemically to a more axiomatic kind of place.
I just share a little insight with, particularly with Daniel's piece that's up on the wall here, just as a kind of the view from a collector. I've always been, just in the art journey, of 35 years, and I'm an amateur. I mean, I didn't go to these. Everybody went to art school. I went to the School of Hard Knocks, but. Years ago I learned about in Santa Fe, New Mexico, Albuquerque, Taos, there was a group in the 30s, the Transcendental Painters Group. And these were Raymond Johnson and Agnes Pelton and Georgia O'Keeffe and Emile Bistrom. And I love that work. I mean, there's just something about the work, the nature of people in the 30s, searching for the spiritual and trying to find it in painting. And when I saw Daniel's work, it immediately struck me. I mean, it actually was on, Daniel was represented by a gallery in New York, and it was on, I didn't see it in person, it was just on my computer screen. I saw his work, and I could immediately see similarities there and things that took me back to that period. And, that's the funny thing. It was just in that kind of moment, of just like that intuition where I'm not really thinking or feeling anything. It's both of those things at the same time. Just something kind of happened, and it was immediately like, I'd like to see the work and then bring it into the collection. So it's just fun. I think most of the work in here, it's just that kind of that intuition that drives the collecting. It's not something I can really think about. It's just this kind of things that Judd said, it happens quickly. It's that fast thinking that's not emotional and it's not thoughtful. It's not logic. It's just all of that together. And when I get in front of a painting and that happens, I know, does it click or does it not click? And so just hopefully for everyone here, if you're a collector, that develops with you. You just get in front of something and you're not thinking. There's a click. And you're attracted to it. And this has been a lot of fun to have the panel here and to have the collection and kind of interact with people. We'll be up for a couple of more months, and maybe we'll change a few things out if we get to that and hang some different work here. But I would just hopefully for everyone that's in art, it's been an exciting week in Houston with the art fair and all the events around it. And, I just think like post-COVID, that whole period of kind of being, separated from people, it's a great time for people to get back together and to have the art fair here and to really bring people in the art community in Houston together. And really kind of, bring some energy to it and kind of leave one thought to everyone, that artists drive this whole thing, and those of us who can have to support the artists, buy the work. And the art fair has been great. There's something for everybody down there. If you've got a couple $100 up to, whatever your limit is, there's something for people down there. And the act of buying art, is a very personal thing, but as David said, it's really an action that has many reverberations. It helps the artist, it builds a collection, it maybe one day helps museums really present great culture, to everyone else, and then some of these things will live on for a very long time. So it's a small act that has a very long life to it. So, any other final words or final thoughts here?
I would just say a huge thank you to you and everyone in the room. We need to support each other. And Houston is an incredible city that way. I can tell you Bob, I'm sure you found business opportunities. We both landed in the city during a slump. And yet Houston created so many good things. My experience in the city is people look out for each other here. And we're going to have to do that even more in the months and years to come. So thank you for this opportunity today.